All characters start as a concept. Before any dice are rolled or any sheets are filled in, your character exists in the ethereal of your imagination. And so, it's important to know exactly what makes a good character concept. Building a character on a bad concept is guaranteed to ruin your experience before you've even had your first session. In this episode, I'm going to give you 5 rules to create a good concept. This is Character Concepts with Tabletop Overlord. Rule 1. Collaborate. Your character starts and ends at the table. Therefore, you shouldn't come up with your character alone. Your character should be informed by the rest of the table. I've seen too many games where everyone comes to the table with their own character, completely uninformed about what the other players and GM wants out of the game. These games get torn to pieces because of the sheer amount of contrast and conflict. I've literally had a game where there was a devout, uncompromising dragonborn paladin named Monomuk Sisal, alongside a bearfolk barbarian bard named Barbarian the Barbarian. Needless to say, it produced some very odd, very forgettable moments. The solution is simple. Communicate. During Session 0, ask everyone what they want to play. Work with the GM and the other players to figure out what the game will be about and how each player wants to engage. Knowing this information allows you to make a character that not only works for the game itself, but also aligns with the rest of the players. Now, this doesn't have to reveal the entire backstory of every character. For some reason, I know many players like to have secrets or big reveals. That's fine. But having 2 lone wolves who insist on doing things their own way will almost guarantee the campaign will stop as soon as it's begun. Just because you haven't begun the game doesn't mean you can't talk about some surface level information or general personality. After all, this is information you're going to learn within the first half hour of play anyway. Rule 2. Use the setting. Before you even start conceptualizing a character, you should know what the setting is. Principally, what are the themes and concepts being explored in the game, and what are the relevant details about the world that accommodates those. This is easiest to demonstrate through a failure to do so. Suppose you have an idea of a daring swashbuckler who is as dangerous as he is charming. But when you arrive at the table, you discover that this isn't a high-adventure campaign. Instead, it's a pulpy New York fantasy. Suddenly, your dreams of having the heroic daredevil with a streak of narcissism stands in stark contrast to the brooding, mystery-themed adventure ahead of you. Playing this character will be grating at best and a parody at worst. Conversely, doing this well is challenging. You have to think deeply about what kind of narrative is being told and how the setting propels that. Then, you'll have to pick what aspects of the setting and narrative you want to focus on. And then you'll have to communicate with the GM and work with him to determine how this character will fit in the world. But I promise, it will leave you with a more fulfilling character. Here's an example. In that campaign setting, you might be drawn to the mystery aspect. So you decide to play an ambitious detective who chases crime for fame and notoriety. He chases the most difficult cases so that he may brand himself as a heroic savant. This character will be equipped and motivated to solve the ensuing mystery, no matter how arduous it becomes. And you'll also have a touch of ambiguity to fit the Neuer setting. His ambition could lead him to make reckless decisions that pull him closer to the criminal at the cost of resources or lives. Or his ambition could be wielded against him, causing him to disregard petty acts of crime or increase the stakes of the conflict unnecessarily. This character fits the setting, provides areas of exploration, has opportunities for growth, and is motivated to propel the game forward. Thus, role-playing him will naturally lend itself to a better game without having to justify why your character is tagging along. Rule 3. Wield the rules. When you're creating your character, you also want a character who is mechanically satisfying to play. Right now, we're talking about a character concept, but it's important to bear in mind how that concept will work mechanically. If the majority of the system you're using is combat, you want to play a character you might find fun during combat. In Starfinder, this might be a simple, rough-and-tumble soldier, or if that doesn't provide you enough options, you might prefer a complex, reality-defying witch warper. Crucially, some GMs will have custom rules to match the setting you're playing in. This is especially common for systems with long traditions that attempt to be a jack of all trades, like Dungeons and Dragons, GURPS, or Fate. If you don't know these rules beforehand, you could create a character that is wholly uninteresting to you. You might end up creating a sorcerer only to learn that magic follows strict rules, material components are necessary to cast spells, and that magic has side effects. Your dream of slinging fireballs left and right are quashed. This is important because you will quickly become detached to a character whose typical gameplay experience is lackluster. If you spend the majority of your time at the table and during combats you dislike because your character's mechanics don't engage you, you miss vital pieces of information and eventually lose touch with the game world entirely. Your character is the window into the world. If the window is smudged, it'll be hard to see through. The flip side of this is that a character who excites you through a session will keep you engaged with the narrative. If you like throwing around fireballs and your sorcerer has fireballs in droves, every time the GM calls on you, you will feel exhilarated. Suddenly, you'll be watching for those opportunities for you to show off your magical talents at the table. And in the meantime, every action anyone else takes will be a potential goldmine of flammable opportunities. Rule 4. Keep an open mind. When you're working on a character concept, especially a detailed one, you'll get prone to tunnel vision. If you get really enamored with your vision of a regal knight, you might be devastated to learn that knighthood is hard to come by and your GM won't allow you to start as a knight. Or maybe another player is already playing a frontline combatant and having another would be redundant. I urge you, rather than dig your heels in or completely abandon the character, figure out what about the character you find intriguing and be flexible about the rest. This way, you can keep an interesting character when still play a character who isn't redundant and doesn't destroy your suspension of disbelief. Maybe your vision of a regal knight is compelling because he faces his fears head-on and has uncompromising morals. Does he really need a title for that? Perhaps the title is merely aspirational, a confirmation that his morals are truly dignified. In this case, it could be a narrative hook as you play the character. Certainly, a quest to achieve knighthood for your regal squire could prove a tale in itself. Maybe your regal knight is compelling because he has station in the world and political pull. He's important and noteworthy, a person other people pay respect to. Does he need to be a knight for that? Perhaps he's a lesser noble of another house, bearing some combat training, but relying on his noble pedigree. He prefers direct action to acting through proxies. Other characters would be surprised to see a noble acting directly and mingling with his lessers. This reputation will earn him a degree of fame, for better or worse. Both of these characters maintain something about the regal knight, but they work given one of the constraints. The squire keeps the setting consistent and the noble prevents redundancies, but notably both will provide an engaging experience that's both tied to the setting and works with other players. Rule 5. Tying it all together. Finally, you want to tie all of these pieces together in a cohesive whole. Everything about your character should evince your concept. The setting, mechanics, and backstory should all make reference to those defining features you set in stone on Rule 4. This is easiest to see through an example. My most recent campaign was set in the Kingdom of Rivellon. We were using Dungeons and Dragons as our system, and the game was going to be about intrigue and civil strife. Rivellon had two features that interested me. First, Rivellon was a feudalistic society. The government was defined by noble hierarchies, legalistic claims, and land ownership. Most people were peasants who worked the land for the noble aristocracy. Some were merchants and tradesmen, afforded some extra prosperity and legal status, but a few were nobility, endowed with wealth and power. Second, Rivellon's religion wasn't as certain as in most D&D games. Clerics and paladins earned their power through patron saints. These saints claimed to be in contact with deities that granted them their powers and can act as a channel to appointed members of their clergy. The saints themselves were known as regular people at some point in life. Meanwhile, the deities were fundamentally ineffable. I knew that I wanted a character who could explore these two factors, as well as bring their conflict into sharp relief. I especially wanted a character who had many commitments, because that would open the door to intrigue and strife, the two themes of the game. I played D&D many times, and I've never enjoyed a strict fighter type because they just lacked options. But I also knew that I didn't want to be just casting spells because I enjoyed the aesthetic of up-close and personal combat. I wanted this character to be aggressive, powerful, and evocative. This would work well with the committed character I wanted to play. This sets me to a melee cleric, a paladin, an eldritch knight, an arcane trickster, an artificer, a ranger, or a moon druid. As I was making this character, I learned that 2 of the other players were full spellcasters and 1 other was a rogue. None of them were religious or had any status, so I didn't need to worry about redundancy there. But neither of the spellcasters could heal, so I knew that my character needed to fill a mechanical gap. Also, holy powers required some connection to the clergy of the associated saint. Even rangers and druids obtained their power through nature saints. As such, I decided to play a paladin, someone who was devout to their saint through sheer reverence, can heal, and maintained that aggressive style I wanted. Putting these factors together, I had my concept. I would play a devout paladin knight who sought to do good in an imperfect world. He would make hard decisions based on his unflinching morals and defend his beliefs with mighty fervor. He would use his pull to ensure the good of the land and lead troops into battle whenever called upon. He was Krieg Fulbright, a paladin of Amaterasu and a knight of Lithuania. Now, there were some concessions. Being a paladin would mean that I would necessarily be obligated to the church in some capacity. The devotion wasn't sufficient. Also, knighthood required me to be in the service of a noble. This would place certain military obligations on me that my ranking noble could call upon, for better or worse. I was okay with these because I knew that it was the cost of having the most important aspects of my character, his conflicting devotions and his committed moral judgment. These obligations would propel my character into difficult decisions with his morals, his pride, and his status. Ultimately, Krieg proved to be a joy to play. In the first 2 sessions, he used his knighthood to break some people out of jail, struck one of the tiefling players out of prejudice only to repent later, and was defying knightly expectations in preference of his paladin oath. As we played, he wasn't just a character I used to move in the world. He was a part of the world, both affected by and effective in it. Be sure to get off on the right foot with your character concept. And in the meantime, you can listen to my other videos to help you get started. Right now, I have 2 Gazetteer episodes focusing on the setting of Starfinder that specifically include player advice. I'll be releasing more Gazetteer and player advice episodes, so be sure to like and subscribe. If you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon. For just $1, you can vote on future topics and get early access to my videos. And as always, thanks for watching.